I think we're just going to go straight into question and answers. Some things that stood out to you, some things that you want to talk about, things that are not there. You want to talk about process. So we'll just open the floor. Yes, I see a hand. Yes, the young lady. Yes.
Yeah, I was just interested in your thoughts about sports and young people because a lot of what we saw was either college or professional. And just thinking about the developmental aspect of sports and the community building.
I think what we tried to do in the gallery is to really look at sports um, at an elite level, and their sort of cost and consequences to sort of doing that. And so you don't get into to some of the kind of developmental kind of issues that are there. Although one of the things we try to do in the Olympics case is to talk about this idea of the amateur athlete, where you're still getting into younger athletes, but it's still elite athletes. But we don't get into what's often called as the American sports creed, and this idea that sports are tied to our education, no institutions, because of this concept of healthy mind, healthy body, and the idea that sports help teach values. And so we didn't chart that, but we do sort of try to hint at it in certain places, and how this sort of these concepts around sports and youth sort of develop. You also see it in some ways in the basketball case when you get to the kind of idea of racial uplift, which in many ways is a response to the development of basketball. Basketball is developed in the 1890s by the YMCA, to a large extent because boys and men stopped going to church, and they still wanted to teach these Christian middle class values. And so the game becomes associated with temperance, chastity, and African Americans start playing basketball in part because they want to be identified with those Christian middle class values. And then it becomes a way to kind of to challenge racism. So it's hinted at, but it's not explicit. Yes, tell me your name.
Hi, good morning. Having been a long time ago employee of the Smithsonian, I know it's not easy to collect the wealth of artifacts that you have collected. Could you explain to everyone the process you all went through over many decades to collect to build the collection that you have?
Well, usually when museums start, they often start with a collection. And that wasn't the case with our museum. We were authorized and then had to build a collection. And so, in terms of the sports gallery, we'll say the sports gallery was actually the last gallery that got approved in this museum. And so, I start working on collecting in 2013 for a 2016 opening date. But the reality is that everything needed to be collected by 2015 because you've got to build the mounts, you've got to install things. And so it's interesting because I don't really have a background in museums. I was a college professor. And in many ways, my own inexperience and naivete was really beneficial to getting this done. Because if you asked me to do what we did back then, I would tell you it's impossible to build a collection of $5, $6, $7 million, particularly back then when no one had heard of us. You got to go back to 2013. You pick up the phone and you call athletes, and we're building this national museum, and they would say, "We've never heard of you, and good luck." But now it's much easier because in many ways we're sort of 2 degrees of separation from almost anyone in the sports world. So the challenge of building early on was that you had to find people who believed in what we're doing. And so we found a couple of collectors, people who had been collecting and preserving this history for a long time. And people were very kind and generous. One of the big breakthroughs in terms of collecting was early on when Carl Lewis donated his Olympic medals and a couple of other items. Um, and that was our first big donation, and it was the one that gave me faith and belief that we could build a world-class collection. The totality of Carl Lewis's donations, probably over $1 million. And one of the challenges of my job now is that the sports memorabilia market has become like the art market. People use it as an investment vehicle. And so that makes it a little bit challenging, coupled with the fact that now the sports museum sort of world has also sort of exploded over the last 10 years. Almost every city has a sports hall of fame, every university. So there's a lot more competition, both from the museum sector, but also the auction market. And so it's a challenge, but I think we get our fair share of artifacts. Yes?
How do you determine this is, history is a living history, and there's so many great things that you have in here already. Going forward, how do you determine, what should now, enter the museum? You could argue there should be a Simone Biles section at some point. So how do you sort of determine what should come into the museum going forward?
It's twofold. The first is you have to understand your theory of history, how it is that I think about history, and you have to collect for that. But then you also have to understand the other ways to think about history, the other ways to analyze, because at this point, I have to collect for the museum so we can rotate, but I also have to collect for the curators who's going to occupy my role 50 years from now. And so in some ways, you've got to be really broad-minded, and you just can't say, I think this is important. Like, for example, esports make absolutely no sense to me. I cannot imagine coming in here watching someone playing a video game. I'm just talking about me, and I could just be old. But it's become such a cultural phenomenon that I have to think about it and have to consider it and think about what are the politics and what's the culture, what's the social significance of that, so that when someone's doing this work 50 years from now, they have items that sort of help them. You mentioned Simone Biles. Do you know her? Can you put me in contact with her? Because I would love to do that. And so sometimes you also have to step back and get a little bit of perspective. One of the items we just put on display is Simone Manuel's swimming sort of uniform. And so the 2016 Olympics happened. There were a number of stories that, like, this is really important. But then I waited a couple years to kind of see, okay, now let me see if this story still resonates, if it still makes sense. And Simone Manuel's story is important for a number of reasons, particularly if you go back to slavery and swimming. It's this idea that black people had gills and bigger lungs because African Americans or Afro-Barbadians, in many respects, were often employed as divers on slave ships. So if one of the white crew members fell into the ocean, was often a black diver who was expected to jump in the water, save the crew member, and save themselves. And so people thought African Americans had extraordinary swimming abilities. And then you get to the civil rights movement and the ability to swim in recreational spaces, to change some of those laws. Typically what would happen, recreation facilities across the country, is that there would be one day that African Americans could go swimming. And so African Americans would swim, they would drain the pool, put more water in, and then whites could swim the other 6 days. And so to think about her Olympic accomplishments and the long trajectory of swimming and race, and now more contemporary story is the extent to which African Americans drown at a much higher rate than others. So there's a lot of kind of cultural conversations that we could have around her career. Yes.
You've got a great facility, and it's great for people in Washington and people who come to visit Washington. What about the rest of the country? What plan? How do you take this message out around the rest of the country?
And I'm glad you asked that question because that's really is the next phase of the museum. How do we really sort of activate the national in our title? How do we take this history to people who will never be able to come to Washington, D.C.? So we're in the process of developing curricula that'll be available to students. We're also in the process of thinking about how can we do programming across the country, but also thinking about how do we sort of impact targeted markets and demographics. For example, we just are in the midst of launching our sports and race initiative, and we're trying to figure out how can we help professional athletes think about their impact, think about their opportunities, also sort of working to convene conversations around sports and race. And so this is really the next phase, figuring out how do we move from being a museum to a cultural institution that has a national footprint. And so we're in the process of finding the resources to kind of make that happen, but that is one of the topics that we talk about continually here. Yes?
Yeah, so we were just talking about the truth-telling part of the exhibit. For example, one of the things we were talking about is that the Branch Rickey piece with Jackie Robinson, that it was probably more exploitative than I thought anyway, and that how he rated, it wasn't just him, but the major leagues rated the Negro leagues, and I appreciated that. That was something new that I'm sitting with a little bit, but I appreciate the truth-telling that's a part of this museum.
Thank you. It's a difficult and complicated story about the integration of baseball. Jackie Robinson integrates in 1947, and then you really start to see the decline of the Negro Leagues. One of the hopes of the African Americans in the Negro Leagues, the ownerships, what they hoped was that the Negro Leagues would be incorporated into the minor league system. Or they hoped that they would continue to exist because they were being compensated for the players who were being taken out of the Negro Leagues and put in the major leagues. But that didn't happen. And so it's a complicated story about progress, but also destruction as well. And so it's difficult because I'll tell you another story about that video. And he's in particular referencing the video in the baseball room. In 2018, MLB held the All-Star Game here in Washington, D.C., and they wanted to host their gala here at the museum. And we invited MLB to come to the museum to watch that video because it's pretty harsh in some ways. There's a section where Kevin Blackistone, the reporter from ESPN, he says in a direct quote, Major League Baseball has done an unbelievable job of whitewashing its racist history. And so we didn't want to surprise them with that. So we brought them in, said, this is how we're framing the story of the integration of baseball. And this is our narrative from our perspective. And so you don't want to blindside people with it. And so try to be good partners. And so it's been something that people go into that room and it is a different perspective. And so I think it's really powerful too. Yeah. Saw your hand.
How did you go from professor to museum curator?
That's a good question. Well, I got invited to come to the museum about 11 years ago. And they asked me to help them think about how to put sports in the other exhibitions because they had decided that they were not going to have a sports gallery. And I thought that was crazy. But I did what they asked me to do. I helped them. They sent me all of the scripts for the other galleries, and I sort of helped them think about how sports fit into some of the larger narratives. And then at the end, I made a case for why the museum should have a sports gallery and how they could do it. And then I went back to being a college professor. I got a call from the museum 4 years later, and they said, we decided to put a sports gallery in the museum, and we want you to be the curator. One, I had no idea what that meant. But I also knew that I couldn't say no. And so for 2 years, I essentially had 2 full-time jobs. I was a college professor, which I absolutely loved and had no desire to leave the university. And this job, and then after 2 years, I decided to come to the museum full-time because I got a chance to really think about all the things that we can do here. So it's a situation where the job found me rather than I found the job. Yes.
Brother Thomas, Jermichael McCoy here. Can you talk about the importance of historically black colleges in the civil rights movement in regards to sports and athletics?
That's something we wanted to sort of emphasize, to think about the historically black colleges and universities and their contributions across African American history. Number one, as a place which provided athletic opportunities, but also as a place that was used to kind of develop leaders and men and women. It's also important to think about that prior to Title IX, there were about 30 schools that offered, 30 colleges and universities that offered women's scholarships. Half of them were historically black colleges and universities. So in many ways they were ahead of the curve. You think about a school like Tennessee State, which sent 40 women to the Olympics, or Tuskegee University, which dominated women's track and field during the 1930s and 40s. One of my favorite quotes in the entire gallery is in the HBCU Game Changers exhibition, and the quote above was from a woman. Her name is Mo Ivory. And what she said is, she said, Spelman College is where I learned what it means to be a black woman in this world. I graduated with a degree in perseverance, self-determination, and confidence. And I thought that was such a perfect encapsulation of what the HBCU experience is for a number of students. I'll tell you another story about Mo Ivory. She's a radio personality locally. And about a week before the museum opened, we had all these special receptions. And I guess someone told her she was quoted in the museum. So she invited me to come on her radio show. And we're just sitting talking about her history, the meaning, importance of historically black colleges. And then I looked over at her, and there are just tears running down her face because she was quoted in the Smithsonian. And I was like, okay, this museum's gonna be a big deal. That was the moment where it's like, oh my. Saw some other hands. Yes.
Actually, just 2 questions. One, the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee is building obviously a huge museum in Colorado Springs. And obviously a number of national governing bodies have a long, rich, and complicated history in some cases. You showcased swimming as a great example. Have you had any conversations with the U.S. Olympic Committee or any of the NGBs in that area? And my second question, it was probably a little bit more complicated, is obviously a lot of the exhibit showcases the importance of advocacy, activism, and protest through sport. Have you or with this emergence of activism and protest in sport becoming much more, I think, commonplace and mainstream globally, have you considered taking a position or convening a debate and discussion that could shape policy or help governing bodies shape policy in that area?
We have not been in conversation with the USOC. I know a number of people who kind of work there, but we haven't been invited to participate in the planning and development of that particular museum. And no, we haven't had much conversation with some of the other Olympic museum organizations. In terms of your second question about convening people to talk about and to discuss and debate some of these sort of initiatives, our secretary, Lonnie Bunch, who was recently installed as the secretary of the Smithsonian, who's the founding director for this museum, one of the things he always says is the Smithsonian can be the great convener, bringing people together to have conversations. And so we are certainly thinking about how to do that and what's most effective and which topics are beneficial to the population. And so that's one that we're considering, but we don't have any definitive plans at this moment. Yeah. Yes.
As a follow-up to Ed's question, what type of feedback or comments have you got from the athletes who are visiting the museum, especially?
Should say that we've probably had about 21 or 22 NBA teams. We've had about 4 or 5 football NFL teams, but probably another 500 NFL athletes, couple of baseball teams, college and university athletes from all over come to the museum. I think one of the things that's important to me is that athletes are able to see themselves in a larger tradition, in a long-standing tradition, to see that so much of what's happened is the product of struggle. And it's often a history that they don't learn, that they don't know. I remember when I was in college in the 1990s, and I went to UCLA, a pretty big school. We won a national championship while I was there. The football team had won 20 straight games, 30,000 students, but there was not one single class on campus that dealt with the political, social, cultural role of sports. And so I think for a number of athletes, it's just something that they are not familiar with or don't often sort of think about. I remember I also had a moment with Brianna Scurry, the goalie from the '99 Olympic team, and I met with her, and we're talking about her career and was talking about donating items to the museum. And we were sitting there talking about it, and in the middle of our conversation, she just kind of threw her hands up and said, I was just trying to win a game. She wasn't thinking about these larger kind of forces that were at play and the audience who were watching. And I think that's just a situation a lot of athletes sort of find themselves in. So it's important to be able to kind of provide some context to them. And so that's been really important. And then I also went up to meet with the NBA and to meet with their front office people. And sometimes it's good to ask a question you think you know the answer to. So I sat and I asked them, why do you want the NBA players to come to the museum? And I was a bit struck by the answer. And they said, well, we want our players to be empathetic. And if you think about professional athletes, particularly in basketball, they're being tracked at 12, 13. They're the center of their social networks. They're told you're on the path to going to the NBA. And many of them are still really young, 21, 22 years old, worth $25 million. And so part of it is getting athletes to think beyond themselves. And so as I lead the athletes around the museum and through the sports gallery, always have that in mind, that's one of the target outcomes that we would like to see. Yes?
One of our speakers mentioned the importance of changing the world through service. And maybe I didn't get through the whole area, so excuse me if it's there, but there are many athletes in there that are great philanthropists, and many of them that also give back through service in a number of activities. And I'm wondering if that might be folded in, because right now someone coming away from this could say, well, these are all the great accomplishments, but did any of these folks give back other than protest or try to make a social change, but not change an individual's life, on the street kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so there are points where we try to emphasize that. For example, if you go to the Tiger Woods Game Changers case, tell 3 stories. The first is him going on to Oprah Winfrey and using the term Cablinasian, which became a crucial moment in terms of redefining race. Shortly after that, for the first time in American history, you can check more than one box. And so thinking about multiracial identity. But the second story is about the Tiger Woods Foundation, which has raised over $80 million to support STEM education in Black and brown communities. And one of the principal ways that he raised the money was when Tiger Woods was at the height of his fame. The ratings went through the roof, attendance went through the roof. And so if the payout was $1 million, they would often pay Tiger Woods, if the first place payout was $1 million, they would often pay Tiger Woods $500,000 just to show up. But according to PGA rules, you can't take that money as salary. And so it was donated to his foundation. One of the other areas I want to emphasize, I haven't had the artifacts to do it, is to think about someone like Muhammad Ali, who raised over $100 million for Parkinson's research, or the Jackie Robinson Foundation, which has sent a number of African Americans to college. Still to this day, they're giving out 50 scholarships a year. And so I think the legacy of a number of these athletes is really important to acknowledge. And so there are particular places where we try to do that as well. Yes?
I just had an interesting point when mentioned in Devin Rivera, graduate of Cal State University. I thought it was interesting when bringing up the HBCU roles in sports, but also the irony. Like one of the pictures there, the Howard baseball team, and growing up in the city, and now the irony that program has been disassembled and there's no baseball team in Howard, and then now Savannah State has just lost their baseball team. Just seeing the irony in the sports, how important they are, but how we're focusing so little on it now.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, to think about how in some ways football and basketball has really kind of dominated that industry, and the need to keep up in those 2 sports has caused us to lose opportunities in others. I think that's a really important part to kind of think about. Yes?
Yeah, it may have been there, but we're pretty quickly. Interested in your thoughts and relationship with the black media in supporting sports, such as and promoting it, such as the Pittsburgh Courier.
That is one of my big sort of regrets, because part of it, sometimes you just don't have the objects to tell the story that you want to tell. Certainly if you think about the legacy of Wendell Smith and Sam Lacey, reporters who use their platform to bring change in the sports world. And when I think about those 2 guys and Doc Young, I always think about a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who said that leaders don't follow public opinion, they make public opinion. And so a number of African American writers and journalists use their pen and platform to really push society to do better. And that is one of the things that if I really talk about the big regrets that I have in the gallery, is that that's not there.
Okay, one of the pillars of this conference is about involvement together with inclusion, sport for all, inspiration, sport for life, involvement, sport for change. And I think the gallery, the sports gallery, showcases very well how sport was crucial for social change, for equality, the fight for equality, for civil rights, etc. But my question is now, do you have some feedback about how the sports gallery is impacting visitors and is promoting change? So for visitors, how the visit to the sports gallery is promoting social change for better?
We don't have any data to do that. I think it's really important to do that. I think too often at the Smithsonian, we measure success by visitors and the number of objects in our collection. And I think one of the things that our museum in particular has to do in a space we have to be a leader is redefining what success is. And so part of it is engaging questions like that. It's also difficult to do because you have the immediate impact, but then you also don't know how something resonates with someone 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So it's also hard to kind of get a sense of that as well. So it'll be interesting, over the years to kind of see how this shows up in various narratives and people sort of telling of their own histories.
David.
Yes.
David.
My name's John Seymour. I'm a student at Georgetown University. I love seeing the Georgetown jacket in the basketball area. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the impact of John Thompson socially, and how do you really capture that large aspect through one artifact and a description? How does that process really play out?
I'm glad you asked about Georgetown because I wanted to talk about that. If you didn't get a chance to go and take a picture of the Georgetown jacket, you should do it because it's going off display in July. I know, boo. But that jacket's really powerful to me because in some ways it's part of my own sort of personal story. I got a chance to talk to Coach Thompson, and I told him that growing up, I thought Georgetown was a historically black college. And he says, yeah, people come up to me and say that all the time. But you got to remember, it was in Chocolate City. John Thompson was one of only 3 or 4 black coaches at the time. There was him, John Chaney at Temple, there was George Raveling at Iowa, Nolan Richardson, and that was it. And John Thompson was someone who used his platform to really fight for inclusion, to fight for African Americans, and to fight for what's right. And so for African Americans, wearing that Georgetown jacket just wasn't a way of saying, I like the team. It was a symbol of race pride because of what John Thompson meant in terms of being an advocate for African Americans. And so wearing that jacket, people who weren't even basketball fans would wear that jacket because of what he symbolized. And so it's a really important marker of a period in time. And so Coach has been an inspiration for me. There's another thing that I want to get into this collection, and maybe I shouldn't tell you because I need to call him. And there's his basketball. I don't know if you've heard the story about his deflated ball. And part of what he does with his athletes, emphasizing the student part of student athletes, is he says sometimes at one point the ball is going to run out of air. And what do you do then? And so that's an object I would like to add to our collection as well. And do we have time for one more?
Yeah, go on.
One more. And I saw a hand in the front. Yes.
I was going to ask about Georgetown.
Oh, okay, cool. Glad we answered it. Okay, I saw a hand go up really quickly. Got to make this a quick question. We're running out of time.
I was particularly interested in your Game Changers collection and the amount of athletes that were standing up against racism and other sorts of activism. And I'm curious what you have to say about the current movement in international soccer and saying no to racism and how to combat that as I think it's really challenging in soccer, especially because the crowds are so large and it's hard to pinpoint who's actually making the chants or that sort of thing. And there's been a movement on social media, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how to combat that.
I think, sometimes social change takes a long time. And you know, part of it is you've got to change public opinion. You've got to get people to see that that's no longer acceptable. And it's different in different kind of cultural contexts. Why it happens, what does it mean, what are the politics behind someone sort of using these epithets, someone criticizing professional athletes. And so it's important that people stand up and call it what it is. And so I'm really proud of the number of athletes who sort of stood up against it. A lot of times we tend to think of them as professional athletes, but we also have to think of them as employees who have certain labor rights and certain rights in terms of ways that they should be treated in the workplace. And so seeing a number of athletes sort of now think about themselves in those ways and to think about the rights and responsibilities that they have as employees has been an important development as well. But thank you guys for coming. And
and to finish that sentence, thank you for having us. More to the point, we've had privileged access this morning and privileged insight with you. Thank you very much indeed. I think you've got a sense of the engagement from the questions that came from all of us here. So many thanks indeed, Damien. Much appreciated. I was also struck, actually, it's just been sort of coming to me in a way that the gallery seems to match up so neatly the challenges of the African community, the African-American community, I should say, and the athletes with I mean, a lot of, you know, hardened sports fans here wonder at getting to see and feel and witness these great sporting heroes at the same time. So there was a magnificent gallery. So the inspiring power of sport is an obvious theme to have for our next speaker, and he is a very important person to all of us here, and we at the Service of Sport at the Service of Humanity are delighted to have him among us here today. So I'd like to ask His Eminence Cardinal Lacroix, Archbishop of Quebec, member of the Pontifical Council for Culture at the Vatican and Primate of Canada, to join us to share a few thoughts on the inspiring power of sport. Cardinal.
Bonjour. As you know, I'm from Quebec, the French-speaking part of Canada. I'm delighted to be here. Just before I get into my theme, what an inspiring place this is. Thank you so much for welcoming us here and for choosing to bring us here for this too short visit. I need to come back for another 5 hours at least. This is really awesome. If my mother was here in this auditorium, the first thing she'd say, I don't want to be the one to have to dust these fixtures on the wall. But I must say I was very impressed to see in the baseball area of what we saw this morning, my favorite team up there, the Cardinals. Aha, you got it, huh? It's a great honor for me to stand amongst you today, indeed. It's a privilege to represent and speak on behalf of His Eminence, Gianfranco Ravasi, the President of our Pontifical Council for Culture. Before anything else, I wish to thank President John DeGioia and Georgetown University for hosting this superb event, Sport at the Service of Humanity Conference. I've only been here a day, but what I've experienced so far is remarkable. You're a wonderful host. Thank you so much. The Catholic Church, alongside many other religious faiths and beliefs, has always been keen on promoting artistic craftsmanship and beauty, making the world a more attractive place to live in. Sport plays a major role in this tremendous project. In fact, sport challenges us to be our very best when competing with others, while faith is a challenge in being winners in the not always easy game of life. Both faith and sport act as twins. They combine the powers of making human life a truly worthy experience in overcoming obstacles, in rewarding hard work, resistance, perseverance, and pride in the success of the venture. In sport, as in religion, we gain the promise that all efforts are rewarded, that one never stands alone in success as in trial. However, our Christian faith has been the inspiring power of helping us believe that we are forever guided by a heavenly trainer, God our Father. Only God has this ability to make life appear as a sport, having a definite meaning that is a pathway to a victorious destination, since it leads to fulfillment in beauty, peace, and love. While earning good stamina is the fruit of continuous training in sport, such is the grace of God that repays one's faith, hope, and charity. After St. Paul, every Christian, having competed in the sport of life, should say, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful. Sport is a universal phenomenon. In antiquity, as far back as 776 BC, the ancient Olympic Games were primarily a part of a religious festival in honor of the Greek god Zeus. Wherever and whenever human beings have lived together, they have taken pleasure in sharing games, in competing with one another, either individually or in teams. The ancient Greek tradition has been revived in our modern Olympic Games, although they now evolve in a more secular environment. The Olympic motto, Citius, swifter, Altius, higher, and Fortius, stronger, conveys ideals that perfectly fit the Christian quest for holiness, solidarity, and perfection as we make our way in life, striving to become the worthy children of God. Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Sport is also, as we know, a universal language that everyone can understand. Nelson Mandela is often reported as saying, sport has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. I can't help but think that this quest of bringing people together, of helping them to understand and have respect for each other, of finding ways of living happily and in peace, is exactly what the Christian way of living is all about. Add to these values the grace of faith, and you will recall the words of our Lord describing what is to be remembered from him and a duty for whoever wants to comply with his order. I give you a new command. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Sport has the potential of bringing out the best in people. Faith communities and sport organizations can make a significant difference by working together and combining their resources. They become an inspiration for personal life, for creating communities open to all, and by offering an opportunity of involvement to strive for a better society. Pope Francis enjoys welcoming sports team to the Vatican. Seemingly, the Argentinian soccer team is greeted somewhat more heartedly. We'll forgive him for that. I particularly find interesting this quote from Pope Francis. In my humble opinion, it fits the goal that sport at the service of humanity aspires to attain. Challenge yourself in the game of life like you are in the game of sports. Challenge yourself in the quest for good in both church and society, without fear, with courage and enthusiasm. Get involved with others and with God. Don't settle for a mediocre tie. Give it your best. Spend your life on what really matters and lasts forever. Sport, my friends, is an opportunity to share with others. It has the inspiring power to teach how to live together and to respect differences. I found this out when I was an 8-year-old young boy, an immigrant from Quebec to New England. Even though I didn't utter a word of English, I began integrating into this new community in the back alleys of my neighborhood, playing street hockey and baseball with other kids my age. I never won any gold medals in sport and probably never will, but I did learn how sport can bridge new relationships and heal the alienating factor of being different, a stranger, an outcast. This is why the Catholic Church strives to nurture and promote the values that sport offers: unity, respect, teamwork, and social responsibility of sport leaders. Cardinal Ravasi wisely said that authentic sporting activity weaves together in harmony diverse realities such as the body and the spirit, force and beauty, physical exercise and intelligence, passion and will, immediate intuition, and spontaneous habit. The first global conference of faith in sport was held at the Vatican in October 2016. It successfully launched a global movement to leverage the power of faith in sport as a platform for good. It's now time to move forward, doing all we can to support what is already proving to be a fruitful experience. Thank you for your active participation in this conference. May this time of sharing and learning from each other's experiences help us continue building a better world. We know from experience that sport is a fast track to attain this goal. The Church is at the forefront to bring out the best and the brightest forward, to be in the midst of the world, to make a difference in all fields of life. I love the title of this foundation, Sport at the Service of Humanity. This organization has a great service for the world today. It is greatly needed, and it needs us. Now let's go out there on the field and win the game, giving it our very best support and participation. Let no one remain on the bench. This endeavor requires us all to step up to the plate and score. Have a great day. Enjoy every moment of this conference, and thanks again for your participation.
There is a gift for the Cardinal. It's I'll hold you to.
It's a Murano glass done in Venice with the coat of arms of the Vatican. He knows very well, but it's a present offered to him and to all speakers.
Thank you. Thank you. I finally did get a gold medal.
Thank you so much. Very good. Cardinal Lacroix, thank you very much indeed. And very neatly, a call to action there from the Cardinal, which ties in to where we're going right now, because I have to thank you lot as well, and I'm thanking you for keeping Eugenie happy, which is very good news. Eugenie Deek, who's driven the call to action and the workshops to do that, and you took it on full bore yesterday. Many thanks indeed for your efforts in our four corners of the room yesterday. What did you come up with? That's the point, and Eugenie's with us now to run through the findings. Thank you very much. Eugenie.
Thank you. Well, congratulations to the 80 people who stayed. I'm very appreciative. We had 80 folks who stayed to do discussions, which went beyond time, in fact. So I think that people were energized and wanted time to process. Because it's what we do going forward from here that will really be the impact of the conference. And I'm going to suggest that we also reach out to all of you after you've had some time to think about everything that we've done and what you want to do individually and what you want to do as a corpus, as a body. So we had four discussion groups engaged. One was engaging on questions of values. Another was inspiring change through major sports. Then we had the one on being a role model as an athlete, and then bridging divides through sports. And I'd like to thank particularly Tony, Susie, and Maya, who helped along with me to facilitate. So I'm just going to give you a few highlights that I think you can take from here. In terms of the values discussion, the important thing was really to start early, that we need to really inculcate values into children from the very beginning, because if we start later in life when they haven't had the experience of values, we're playing catch up. And that we need to make values tangible. So we can't just talk about teamwork. We need to be able to model for students and for young people what is it to be a team member? How do you show compassion? And that we also need to give athletes a chance and a time to do service so that they understand that they exist in part of a broader community. So the takeaway from the values discussion was really to live the values. Then in terms of inspiring change through sports, there was a lot of discussion about incorporating principles of social justice and consciousness into the mission statement of each organization, and that the impact was to raise consciousness that lead to actions to drive social change. So I would say the takeaway from there is really to be declarative about what we're doing, because we know that for most of the young people that we deal with, it is the experience of sport itself, not what it's going to lead to, but how it allows them to be, that is the important thing that they will take forward in life. In terms of bridging divides, we shared an action item that also came from the Inspiring Change Group, which is that we want to sustain this community, that we want to build an online consortium to continue and extend this community so that we can increase communication. We can, in fact, be brothers and sisters with each other. We can share best practices and partnerships, and we can raise awareness. So we will work, and you will be hearing from us in terms of sustaining those connections. And then last was the group on role models as athletes. I would say each of you is a role model by being here and by the work that you do, so thank you so much for that. And that we want to think about how we help athletes identify themselves as leaders so that they're transformative in their own lives and in their broader communities. So each of us, in fact, is called to be a beacon for each other and for the communities that we're part of. So that's the summary. I have many, many more notes, but I didn't want to talk at length. I just wanted to leave you with these ideas about living the values, being declarative, sustaining the connections, and being beacons. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I also would suggest that each of us take time just to be quiet, not right now necessarily, but meditate on what we have learned and think about how we carry that forward, because I think it's the internalization of all this experience. We're all flooded with so much inspiration, and now we need to translate that inspiration into our own action and how we each individually live it. So any other comments that anyone would like to share? You don't have to, but I want to open it up. All right, Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone.
Eugenie, thank you very much for all the work you've put in. And they're all doables, and that's the important thing, isn't it? These are real action points that you can bring into play in your own sphere. So you'll get more from Eugenie in due course on that, but let's follow that up. You'll have seen in our program that this next section is called Overturning a Wrongful Conviction. Golf Art Saved Me and Georgetown Set Me Free. Now, if you don't know what that story is, you've got to be interested. That has to pique your curiosity. If you do know what that story is, you know it is an extraordinary one and a fascinating one, and we have a great opportunity to talk to the one man at the very heart of it, the two people who made this story all possible. What I want to do now then is to call up Mark and Valentino. That's Mark Howard, Valentino Dixon. Come up and join us, please, on the stage. Come and take a seat. As I say, it is just the most extraordinary story. And I think, in a way, trying to capture it all in conversation in the course of 25 minutes or so is a challenge. And the good news is we have a video to show you, be 5 or 6 minutes, I think, to lay out the backdrop to this case and to give you a little bit more idea about the picture you see up here on the stage, the pictures you saw on the way in. So let's have the video, shall we?
Wrongful convictions, it's an epidemic. It's not isolated to one race. It affects poor people, it affects wealthy people, black, white.
The criminal justice system doesn't work like it does on Law and Order or CSI, or huge numbers of mistakes are being made every day.
Not everybody who's behind bars belongs there. Innocent until proven guilty is a great ideal if we could actually live up to it, but the sad reality is that we don't.
I spent 11 years in prison based on hearsay.
Every day in prison is a bad day. Mark Howard and I have been friends since I think I was 3 or 4 years old. We grew up together from lovey-dovey preschool, and we continue to joke that Mark went to Yale and I went to jail.
Marty himself was wrongfully convicted when we were seniors in high school. His parents were murdered. He was convicted of murdering his parents. And I'd always believed that he was innocent. And finally I got involved with his legal team, and eventually it took him 17 and a half years, but we were able to prove his innocence.
6,338 days I was in prison before I was finally released on December 27th, 2007. So when Mark asked me to teach a class at Georgetown, in a weird way I thought it was crazy because it was kind of like out of the blue. We started talking about it and I go, "Are you serious?" He goes, "Yeah." And what ends up happening? You end up in prison.
And Marty coming down here and being a co-professor with me for this course and for the goal of trying to get other people, other Martys if you will, out of prison was just tremendous and really exciting.
I think America sees itself as such a gold standard in terms of human rights and justice, and then you see these instances where the system has so incredibly failed someone.
I absolutely believe in John Moss's innocence. It's so just obvious that he didn't do it.
How anybody ever got a conviction out of this, I have no idea. It's a textbook example of a coerced confession or false confession case.
They didn't even find the murder weapon. There was nothing that really linked, like forensically linked Kenneth to the crime the night of the murder.
There's a door on the back of the house.
They
found blood pooling in the front bedroom and then supposedly dragged her to the back bedroom diagonal across the house.
So this is probably it. So the shooter was coming from East Cold Spring Lane that way, tried to rob Terrence McCoy over here, and there's the guardrail.
A couple of weeks before Justin Baumgartner was murdered, he filed a police report saying that a green Ford had tried to run him off the road.
John confessed. He was repeatedly punched by Trooper Smith, is what he said, and basically were like, if you don't say you did this, if you don't confess, this is where they'll find your body.
When they accused me of this, like, it hit me so hard, right? It just killed me, you know, and I figured that it would all work itself out. When they gave me 39 years or whatever he gave me, I was just, I think I was in space.
Well, two things both of you keep saying is there's no physical evidence. What physical evidence should there have been? This is a shooting on the street.
Valentino's clothes were taken into evidence and his hands were tested for gunshot residue, and none of that evidence was presented in court.
What was your perception of Monfried, his defense lawyer, at the time of the trial?
He was, you know, a seasoned, you know, well thought of attorney.
He actually fell asleep during the trial.
A lot of attorneys listen with their eyes closed.
These are lawyers who, you know, take oaths to uphold their oaths to their profession, and they cheat, steal, hide evidence.
They are never going to budge on his being guilty, and we're just students. So it's going to be hard to convince all of these people that we're right and they're wrong.
Would you happen to know where or who the people who live in apartment B are?
I was never 100% sure that Kenneth Bond was the person that I saw that evening. His life should not have been taken away from him based on the testimony that I provided.
This isn't just a class. This isn't just about wrongful convictions. This is about people's lives.
The Holy Grail for us would obviously be one of our 5 cases, one of the 5 people we believe were wrongfully convicted, getting out, getting exonerated, and coming home.
They have done the calculations and have found that you are eligible for release today.
It was extremely emotional hearing his family cheering, clapping. I just felt overwhelmed.
I just felt so happy for him and hopeful that this experience could happen again with his class and with other people who have been wrongfully convicted.
The students gave me the most hope that I've ever felt in 27 years. When the students got on board, it was like, this is gonna happen. The minute I mentioned Georgetown, they said, oh, you're going home. Nobody had any doubt. You know, nobody had any reservation.
Honestly, for this to happen is an out of this world experience for me. It seems almost miraculous in this.
So there's the backdrop to the story. Oh, we got the lights back on as well. Great. Let me introduce then, first of all, Mark Howard, who is the Professor of Government and Law at Georgetown University, and to the point is founding director of the Prisons and Justice Initiative. And beside me, Valentino Dixon, golf artist, and of course, as you know, exonerated for wrongful conviction with the direct intervention of the PJA. So, gents, thanks very much indeed for joining me here. I should say, as you can tell from the pictures, they know each other only too well. I might do well to get a word in edgeways once they get going and tell us the story. I mean, not many people, first of all, find their Holy Grail anyway, so it is an incredibly uplifting finish. But as a typical Englishman, I'm going to get onto a downbeat start here. Valentina, you said you were in space when your sentence was declared. You didn't know what you were lining up for. How long did that sense of being in space last? I mean, we are talking what was it? I couldn't work out, but Marty had 6,338 days. I don't know if you ever counted how many days you had in there.
Years.
Well, years and years.
Because days kind of, it's not as strong enough as years. You can say 20,000 days and people can't really calculate that in their brains. When you say 27 years, it's a whole different level.
And 27 years is one thing. You have a story to tell through those years, but how long did it take you to get any sense as to what on earth you were going to make of your situation, yourself? Because that's on ad infinitum. That's forever, 27 years, or possibly could have been longer, of course.
It took me about 7 years to get started, because the first 7 years I was like in a fog, in the twilight zone, all right? And then reality started to hit me that if I don't, like in the Shawshank Redemption, he says, get busy living and get busy dying. So I had to conclude or come to a realization that I needed to get busy living in the 6x8 cell by any means necessary.
And tell us then, because you had someone who prodded you, really, didn't you? Your uncle sort of said, come on,
yeah, well,
you've got to do what you can do and what you're good at.
I was an artist as a kid, and I went to Performing Arts High School, but I had abandoned the gift. And my uncle, he kept saying, hey, you got to do something with your gift. And I didn't believe I had the gift anymore, because I think I went almost 10 years without painting or drawing or anything like that. So he sent me some colored pencils, and eventually I started drawing, and I started drawing every day, up to 10 hours a day, every day. And this gave me a sense of peace. It was very spiritual, because in prison it's a dark place, and it's almost designed to break your spirit. So you have a choice to allow it to break your spirit, to turn you into a very bitter, angry individual, or it can transform you into the person that you were meant to be in the beginning.
And what sort of things were you drawing in the beginning?
Everything. I didn't want to limit myself to just African American art or abstract. I drew everything: animals, landscapes, name it, I was drawing it.
I asked that partly because it's almost the oddity of this story, but the rather wonderful thing for a golf-loving audience is that you were asked to draw a golf scene. And isn't it odd that, of all sports...
Let me say this. I'm a black kid from the inner city, but I'm known as the artist in Attica. So the warden comes by, he says, hey, Valentino, you think you can draw my favorite golf hole? Of course I can. But it's should I draw it? I didn't know if the inmates was going to flip on me. When they say flip, that means turn against you. So it was a gamble, And I've always been quite, sort of a gambler. So I drew the picture. I tried to keep it as discreet as possible, but everybody found out that I was drawing this picture for the warden. And to my surprise, nobody was angry. They were excited. Like, these guys were like, wow, that's cool. Like, come on, really? Even I was like, But, so it was another inmate that suggested, hey, you need to draw more golf courses. I said, hey, get out of here. What are you talking about? Where are we going here, But once again, I found myself drawing golf courses every day, never been on a golf course, didn't know anything about the game. And whenever I put my time and energy into something, I just go in hard, and I have a tunnel vision. I can't see anything but exactly what I need to do here. So I think I had amassed about 40 or 50 drawings, and I wrote a 3-page letter to the Golf Digest magazine and sent one of the pictures, and the Golf Digest responded. And they came and interviewed me in Attica. And then the Golf Channel followed.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
There's a really interesting part of the story, which is that there was a column in Golf Digest called Golf Saved My Life. Yeah. And in that column, people would write people who golfed would write, someone had lost a limb as a war veteran, someone had been through a really painful personal experience, and they would write about how the sport of golf saved them. And Valentino's column was published in the Golf Saved My Life, but he had never actually played golf or been on a golf course, but it was how the sport of golf, through his artistic vision of it, and the landscapes and the beauty of it, made him feel free in this 6x8 cell in Attica, one of the worst prisons in America. So that Golf Saved My Life story dimension is really important and really beautiful.
But just tell us about, I mean, obviously it drew attention to you.
Yes.
But to keep on drawing golf scenes, a sport you have no connection with, probably no interest in at the time that came, there must be something in the execution of a golf scene, bizarrely, that really drew you in.
Well, really, where I grew up at, this is a very bad place. Economic abandonment, social neglect, drugs, violence. And the only time I had a sense of peace is when I went fishing once or twice in the summer with my father. So when I started drawing these golf courses, it took me back to that one place in time where I had a sense of peace. And it just did something to my spirit that no other no other objects or other matters that I was drawing did.
And I just want to dwell just for a moment on the art itself, because we were having a chat yesterday and I made the great faux pas of asking you about your paintings. Well, you were on to me like
Drawings.
a ton of bricks. Precisely.
Right.
They're not paintings, and here's me thinking they are. So you've actually developed a technique all of your own here.
Yeah, it took me about 10 years. I read something that says an artist comes into his own after about 10 years of just constant, repetitious work. Okay. So it took me about 10 years to develop this style, to layer the color pencils on top of each other, to develop this paint-like look. And that's the goal now.
Which you pursue on a day, that is you.
Yes.
That is.
And I hope people will look, I mean, there's the Healy Hall here, but there are also 8 drawings that are out there. And as you just saw, it irks Valentino when people call them paintings, but at the same time, people call them paintings because they look like paintings. And the extraordinary element of it is that these are all with colored pencils because he didn't have oil paint. He wasn't allowed to have that in prison. All he could have was colored pencils. And through this technique that I think he's the only artist in the world who has developed to this point, it's layer after layer after layer. I mean, there's dozens of hours. Some of these drawings took you over 100 hours, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a unique technique that he developed just with the only materials that he had in the conditions that he was in. So there's a unique story and a unique element to the art.
Yeah, because there's nothing against painters, because I can paint too.
That's right.
But you can't take any shortcuts, okay? With a paintbrush, I can paint a tree in a matter of 20 seconds if I know the technique on how to get, But with the pencil, you can't. I might be there 4 hours with just one part of the little tree, So I respect it more because it's the time consuming and you really have to put a lot of effort, into each drawing.
Well, painting gave you a freedom within. This lot set you free, of course. That is the fairy tale part of this story. And I guess from your perspective, to reach the Holy Grail, okay, once, you've got more to do, but what an inspiration for you and for your students to pursue now.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it was miraculous. It was something that we hoped for, but we prepared our students for the reality that we likely wouldn't reach that point or that it might take years afterwards. But to think that our class ended on May 1st, 2018, and on September 19th, Valentino was released, thanks to the new evidence that the students had found and that was presented by Valentino's attorney, was beyond our wildest dreams. But that said, we've now set the bar really high. And we have a number of other cases we haven't given up on that we're working on. The others, 3 that you saw in that video, we taught the course this past spring semester where we have 5 other cases that we're hopeful on, and we're preparing a whole set of other cases for this coming semester. And it's being filmed by a TV production company for a multi-episode documentary series that will hopefully be streaming to a major network near you. It will be. I just can't quite reveal the details of it yet.
So you're free. We saw that on the screen there. I would imagine as much shock again as euphoria to start with. Must have been a very odd sensation.
Well, not necessarily, because I always had a hope, and I always believed that I was going to be released. I just didn't know when, you know.
Well, let me ask you now then. I mean, you have time to reflect on this, and over time you're going to have more time to reflect on this, and the fact is you spent 27 years inside and you shouldn't have. How do you process that? You must have days when you feel pretty angry.
My mother do, because I'm the only child and I went to jail on her birthday. So she lost 27 birthdays. She refused to celebrate her birthday. So she's still angry right now, but I'm different, you know. I'm just grateful to be alive. I know guys that didn't make it up out of there. So I don't have time to be bitter and angry. It's too much work to get done.
What do you say to your mum then?
She just told me to shut up, you know.
Quite right too, probably.
But you know, Valentino has the spirit, and you're getting a sense of it here, that's extraordinary. He's so positive, so optimistic. And it's extraordinary, but at the same time, it's not unique, because I've seen it in other exonerees. I've seen it in my friend Marty. You know, Marty wasn't quite 27, it was 17 and a half, but came out all smiles, all happy, all ready to go. And they all have this sense that they want to help other people, which is incredible. Valentino has been in contact with the other, hopefully, potential exonerees in the same cohort. They're in touch. They have a bond, even though they've never met. Valentino is now becoming a criminal justice reform advocate. He's focusing on the issue of sentencing reform. He started his own foundation called the Art of Freedom Foundation. He's someone who's out in the public eye, who's using his experience, his story, and how it inspires others to help push for change, because there are so many injustices in our criminal justice system, so many mistakes that need correcting, so many people who were wrongfully convicted, and so many others who are serving far too much time for mistakes they made when they were much younger. And Valentino has really emerged as a leading spokesperson. So in a sense, he doesn't have time to be bitter. He's focusing on the present and on the future.
Which is great to hear, very uplifting actually. But we sort of need to complete the circle here. You're asked by the warden to draw the 12th hole on at Augusta. Where were you earlier this year?
Oh, I went to the Masters.
And who did you meet at the Masters?
I met Jack Nicklaus and I met Tiger Woods. Right. And I told Tiger Woods that he was going to win before he won. Yeah.
What did Tiger say at first?
Well, Tiger looked at me. He says, I'm going to try my best. I says, no, Tiger, you're going to win. I have it on my phone.
I tell you, this is bizarre how this works, because when you told me this, actually, Mark, you told me first, I actually sat back and thought, oh, lucky devil, to meet Tiger and to meet Jack Nicklaus. I'm a keen golf enthusiast. They're the lucky devils. I mean, it's an incredible story. Have you been out on the course yet?
I have, but I'm no good. I'm terrible. I'm a terrible golfer.
Work in progress.
Well, work in progress, but I don't. You can't teach an
Tom
old
Watson
dog.
gave him a
you
lesson.
Can't teach an old dog new tricks. I just don't see it.
Yeah, that's right. 10 years. Practice every day. 10 hours.
With no guarantee. Yeah. Well, look, I think from your perspective too, Mark, it is an extraordinary journey you've had, given your friendship with someone who was thrown into jail. Obviously, that must be the bedrock under which all this has emerged, but it's turned into your route map in life, in a way.
It is. I mean, I've completely rededicated my life to criminal justice reform, to overturning wrongful convictions. I was hired at Georgetown as a specialist on European politics. Nothing to do with criminal justice, nothing to do even with the United States. And through my friendship with Marty, when we reconnected and I started visiting him, and I really dedicated my life to getting him out of prison, I even went to law school. I'm a Georgetown alum myself, actually, having gotten a law degree while I was a full professor here. And it's a direction that I've gone full speed ahead, and personally, professionally, all I do is try to reduce the injustice in our criminal so-called justice system. And being around Marty's exoneration and now Valentino's exoneration, these are some of the greatest moments in my life. It's so extraordinary to take part in correcting such a horrific injustice, but also when on the other end you have such a wonderful person like Valentino and like Marty. And we hope to continue, and we're really proud that Georgetown has been at the forefront of this movement and has gotten the recognition that I think we deserve, but also there's so much more that we want to do, and we're really proud.
Well, I'm never going to ask to take you on in a drawing or painting competition, but if you want to game of golf sometime, I might have a chance there. It sounds quite promising. We've got some time for some questions from you, and already we've got some hands going up. So if we can get the microphone around, Amy has her hand up down the front, and then perhaps we can go over to the side there. Could we get a microphone down the front here, please? Thank you.
Hi. I saw that the Innocence Project was mentioned in this. What's their relationship with your course, and did they provide any funding for the camcorders and the things that the students were using?
Well, so we are connected with the Innocence Project. Marty is on the Innocence Project board. He is very close with many of the attorneys there, but it's not an Innocence Project. This is a Georgetown project. We had a donor who supported all the expenses for our students, and that donor is on the founding board of the Innocence Project as well, so there are a lot of ties. Valentino in his civil suit is being represented by a firm that's connected with Barry Scheck and the Innocence Project. So there are a lot of ties. We're very close with them. We consult regularly. We talk about cases, but we're not in any way a part of them. We're allies, you might say.
Okay. Thank you.
There were some more hands that went up. If we go over there, and then we'll come back across to the other side, I think.
Okay. My question is the process of getting students actually involved in a real-life activity. And sort of your thoughts about universities no longer being ivory towers per se, but really helping students who have different interests. I'm thinking of athletes getting more involved in the community, just that whole process and what it takes to get universities and sort of the, you've got thousands of students with incredible capabilities and knowledge working with professors like yourself, tackling issues in the community that they live in.
Yeah, I think that this course is coming at a time when the current generation of students is very mobilized, very engaged. They don't see limits. They're not complacent. There are a lot of criticism that can be made. They're narcissistic and obsessed with technology and so on. But I see so many virtues in their passion. And our course, we have a very extensive application process. We had about 100 applicants who had to submit video applications, believe it or not. So it's really, we wanted to have people who are really committed. And from that, we've chosen 15, and I've just been going through that process that will be starting next semester. And frankly, all of them were amazing. There are actually, I believe, 3 varsity athletes among the 15 who were chosen. And I agree with you that there's a connection between a prominent role, whether it's on campus or in society, and larger issues. And I think many of the athletes at Georgetown are also seeing that connection, that they can have a larger impact. And they want to be associated with a project that wants to have such an impact. So I'm so impressed by our students. They're so committed to this cause, to justice. I just wish we could have more classes like this. But this is the only class in the country. And I think other schools are contacting us. They want to do it. It's hard to have the connection that Marty and I have and this backstory that we have going back to 3 years old and the effort to get him out. And obviously the success we've already had with Valentino. But I hope that this is something that other universities will use as a model, maybe for this course, but also for the larger issue of engagement with social issues. Because I agree that this is no longer an era of ivory tower, separation. We need to be engaged. We have issues that intersect so many spheres of our lives. And the students see that. So I think it's a natural fit, it's the right time. And I do want to acknowledge President DeGioia since he's here, because there are very few, if any, university presidents that would have who would have the vision and the foresight to go in a direction and in a domain where others haven't gone. I think there's a tendency for many to just sort of wait and be complacent, but President DeGioia, from the get-go, has supported the Prisons and Justice Initiative and our vision of bringing Georgetown into our community and leading the country in terms of criminal justice reform. So thank you, Jack.
So, the guy with the hand up at the back there.
Valentino, you said that you always had hope that you were going to get released, and I was just wondering, I mean, obviously your art probably played a large role in it, but how did you cultivate that hope on a day-to-day basis? Were there people in your life that would visit you, or are there things that really helped you cultivate hope just kind of in a darker time?
You know, I wasn't a very spiritual person before I went to prison. I was young, I was 21 years old, didn't know anything about God or anything like that. You know, however, God, the Creator, whatever we may call him, sent me signs constantly that everything was going to be all right. And whether it's through the artwork, many times I would finish a picture and say, wow, did you complete this? Did somebody else do this? So I know it wasn't me. You know, I was put there for many reasons. And in life, we're all going to be faced with challenges and obstacles. You don't get to decide which test is going to be thrown your way. You know, I help guys get their GED. They used to call me the black Dr. Phil in there because, you know, people always had some issues and they would come to me to help them resolve it. So, I mean, you know, immediately when I walked through Attica, you know, people were like, what you doing here? Like, you know, because I was not going to say I was better than anybody, but I was just different from your average inmate. And it was noticeable. And so the golf art is just another example of part of my journey into me becoming the person that I needed to become.
Yeah, well spoken. One here, then we'll continue.
You have this incredible experience and perspective that no one else in this room has, Valentino. With your 27 years, which I can't conceive of, what would be the message that you would want to convey to the world based on the wisdom and the experience that you've gained through it, that people need to hear based on what you've been through?
Well, most Americans, when they hear the word prison reform, they don't have a clue or an idea as to what's going on and what needs to happen. So my message has been to keep it simple, you know, to keep a lot of the rhetoric out and to focus on the sentencing guidelines in America, because it's the reason why we have over 2.3 million people incarcerated. I just visited a guy that he was given 20 years of life sentence, and he has 47 years in right now, okay? It's a reason why first of all, we know that the system is not designed or equipped to give the poor person a fair trial. So let's start there. Second, if you don't have good legal representation or adequate legal representation, then you're not going to receive fair and equal justice within our system. Which is why China in itself has a population 8 times our size, but only have 1 million prisoners. You know, or we have a reoffender rate of 77% compared to Norway of 20%. Our sentencing laws are just too harsh and excessive, and I think this is what Congress needs to focus on. In New York State alone, there's over 9,000 people that's over the age of 65. Now, I was housed around a lot of these guys, you know, and they have met all the requirements to be released, but however, the parole board says no. So until we reduce the prison population, we're gonna continue to have to deal with this mass incarceration issue. It's just too many older people that's in prison right now. And it shouldn't be a numbers game. It shouldn't be an investment thing. It should be about a person's civil rights, constitutional rights, human rights of all colors. So that's my message, is that we need to kind of get to Congress and say, hey, these sentencing laws, most of them are outrageous, ridiculous, and it violates the 8th Amendment to the Constitution. That's my solution.
If I could just add a little bit of context for those who aren't familiar with the criminal justice and prison system, you know, we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. We have 2.3 million people currently behind bars, another 4 million on probation, another million on parole who are one step away from going right back in. We have 20 million people with felony criminal records, and we have close to 100 million people who have some kind of criminal record, including arrests. So we're a country who we have been devouring our own. We have been arresting, punishing so severely, so many, and it's now affects everyone. Everyone has someone close to them, someone they know. And one of the things we've been doing here at Georgetown and the Prisons and Justice Initiative, in addition to the Exoneration Project, has been education in prisons. Because education is proven to reduce recidivism to virtually zero. The Barred Prison Initiative has been around for 20 years. They have an almost 0% recidivism rate. And Georgetown now is providing courses, even credit-bearing courses at the DC jail, and will soon be expanding to Maryland and eventually offering degrees to incarcerated people. And they will not be going back to a life of crime. They will be succeeding. So there is a huge problem, but there are solutions, and we, again, are at the forefront of pushing for these solutions.
Okay, thank you. Now the clock is ticking, but we have a question down here and another one over there, so hopefully we'll get through the questions. Thank you.
Devin Rivera again. This question's for Valentino. I know you talked about the time and the days not amounting to the years. So how was that transition for you? And let me further explain that. Coming out, you said you spent 27 years in, and it's more like a day-to-day. You have a set schedule, routine for you to do now that you're out. How did that transition work now that you've got a lot more time to grasp? Because we see 30 seconds as, oh, this is just 30 seconds, but that's something that you could value or somebody inside.
Well, I believe in planning everything, all right? And I refuse to allow myself to get stuck in time. I knew what type of phone I wanted. I knew I was updated with the technology out here, you know, whether through magazines, whether through just picking other people's brains that had just left society. So I wasn't stuck in time, I can tell you that much. You know, and I had a plan, and I'm the type of person that stick to the plan, all right? But also to be able to enjoy life, you know, the things that don't cost anything, like walking in the park, you know, paying attention to the nature around you, you know, everything that's going on in our world, you know, everybody's moving so fast, you know, and my message to the people is that slow down a little bit, cut the phone off, and then just, you know, enjoy the world while you can, you know.
Coach Ewing would agree with that. I'll make that point. We had another question over here. Thank you.
Quick question for you, Valentino. You spoke about how you used your art and just you had this very positive mindset that kind of helped you through those 27 years. You also alluded to your mother really finding it difficult. And I know when we talk about dealing with family members being incarcerated, there's a lot of struggle keeping that relationship with family or friends on the outside. How was that process for you and your mom and different family members around you? How did they sort of deal with that, you know, as we continue to be a population that has someone really close to us potentially behind bars? So what was that kind of process like for your family or friends or things like that?
Well, it was very difficult for them, you know, I had to give them hope most of the days. I was the one on the phone, you know, dealing with family issues from prison. This is crazy. I did a lot of reading. You know, I read over 800 books when I was in prison. So, you know, you can throw a issue up at me, and I pretty much can, you know, within a matter of seconds, come to a solution or strategy on how we should fix it. A lot of times, those society, there's so much going on that you don't really have time to really think things out clearly. And I was allowed, you know, to do that at a 6x8 cell. So upon release, I said, I'm gonna keep that same peace, that same place of peace for me. Whereas, you know, I'm up early, I'm praying, I'm reading, I'm studying, no phone is on, none of that type of things. You know, I can cook breakfast for my mom and my grandmom, and, you know, we sit and watch a movie in the evening and stuff like that. It's just deciding what's important in your priorities in the world, you know, and just trying to figure things out and not overcomplicating things, because we do that a lot.
Listening to you say that makes me, it makes prison sound a little bit like a monastery. And I'm thinking maybe my next sabbatical, Jack, if it's okay with you, I might spend it in Attica. I'll get a lot of thinking and writing done.
Let me tell you something. For me, you know, it was all about what type of legacies I'm gonna leave in this world, okay? So if I'm gonna spend, Malcolm X said it best, anybody who spends 10 years or more in prison should be a genius at something. So I wasn't gonna waste my time in there. And I try to encourage other inmates not to waste their time. Like, you have all of this time, utilize it, okay? Of course, you know, a lot of my words went on deaf ears, but I kept on top of these guys. And when I walked out of there, most of them was crying, you know. And I speak to a lot of them on the phone almost every day, and I write like about 20 letters every other week. And I've been back to visit, and I send packages, all of that stuff, you know. So we all have to do, you know, our part, no matter how small or no matter how big it is. We have to do something.
Well, look, you're both inspirational characters, and you've delivered an inspirational conversation for us today, Mark, Valentino. Thank you both so much. That's what they think of it. And you talked about legacy at the end. Well, there's a bit of legacy. That's a bit of Valentino legacy, more legacy on the way out as well. Do have a look at the pictures. Have a word with them. You might want to sell them. I have no idea. But if you want one, you might be able to have it on the wall. Gents, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask you to come off the stage now, because we're getting to a point where, well, we're into that closing phase. And there is one guy who does this extremely well for us, and he's a very good friend. Obviously, he's an integral part of the Sport at the Service of Humanity work. He is also giver of prizes, as you can see, to everyone who comes up on the platform. Gold medals coming out of every pocket with Monsignor Melchior. Since you're up here,
but I need my. Thank you.
We'll let you get your notes. But as you know now, Melchior is right at the very core of what we've done from day one. It's always a great pleasure for us to meet up, as we do from time to time around the world as well. Melchior, the floor is yours.
Well, if it was difficult to speak after the Pope at the opening session yesterday, it's much harder to speak now after the conversation we've just had in this place. After stories of suffering. You know, Adorno, the German philosopher, said that poetry was not possible anymore after Auschwitz. How can you write poetry after what happened in Europe, where millions of people were killed for? So there's no room for empty words of self-celebration now, but for inspiration. And I think what we've seen today in this museum, in the Gallery of Sports, in this museum of African American history and culture, has given us two powerful emotions. One is that of the stories of suffering. I don't know if any of you has ever been to Auschwitz or Dachau or a concentration camp. It's freezing. You don't get out the same as you entered. If it's well done, it conveys a strong emotion, and it is right to be so. But on the other side, what we've seen upstairs in the Gallery of Sports is the positive side of the inspiration side of sports. I was moved seeing in the showcases memorabilia of some of the greatest athletes ever. And again, I happened to be at the Olympic Museum at Lausanne, at the seat of the International Olympic Committee. I was so deeply moved. And this is why sport has the power to touch some of our deepest emotions. Now let me go on with the words that I have prepared in advance. I read a story told by Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison is the co-founder of Oracle, and he happens to be the neighbor to Rupert Murdoch, at least one of his many houses and villas throughout the world. And so Larry Ellison said, I quote, "I was with Rupert Murdoch and I said, 'Talk to me about television. How's the TV business?' And Rupert Murdoch said, 'Larry, I can tell you everything you need to know about television in 30 seconds. It's one word, sports.' And Murdoch said, 'It's the biggest thing ever. It's the true religion of America, sports. That's what we love. And we are religious about it. And it's a great business. It's a phenomenal business, and it will continue to be a great business.'" Religion and business. So is sport a religion? Is it simply a great business? According to many, yes. Sport is just a way to make money, a lot, incredible lot of money. And players and fans and consumers are just a means to that end. Well, not for us. It is true, American thinker Michael Novak says that sport is the true civil religion of America. He says, I quote, "Sports are an almost universal language," something Cardinal Lacroix remembered today, "an universal language binding our diverse nation." It is true also for the rest of the world. Our sports are liturgies, even with the smoke of incense and fires and candles and choirs. Our sports are liturgies. We bring the hunger of our spirits, and many of them, of our hunger, are filled with a beauty, excellence, and grace few other institutions now afford. A Spanish philosopher, Ortega y Gasset, dismissed sport as a form of cheap drama. He says, nations and communities need drama, and sport is the cheap form of drama in our time. But I said, no, Mr. Ortega, you're wrong. Sports is about epic. It is true, it's drama, but it is not a cheap form of drama. It's epic, and we had a proof of it last Wednesday at the arena. How the Georgetown Hoyas came back. They did a great remontada. They overturned the results of the match. It was epic. Where do we find epic in our times? In the arenas and the stadiums, when people stand up, caught by emotion. So this is a powerful thing we have. And our conference was not about sports as a religion, but about sport and faith. How to combine the resources of these two powerful things that the Creator has given to us. Sport, we've seen, can be a source of inspiration. It can move people, it can bind together nations. It offers examples of beauty, of grace. Think of gymnastics, Simone Biles. It's grace. It's overcoming the laws of nature, the law of gravity. Many millions of people find joy and inspiration in sport gestures and sports accomplishments. And yet, we all know that the world of sport is not a paradise island exempt from the evils that threaten our society. And sometimes they even foster those evils. Think of the challenges the world of sport is facing today. Racism, we've seen examples here and today, even in the Italian soccer league. Last Sunday, a match had to be suspended because of racist insults to Balotelli, an Italian player of African origins. This is not only an American phenomenon. Racism, violence around stadiums. If you go to a soccer match in Europe or in Spain, you would see police in full gear prepared to fight against hooligans. And shouldn't it be a moment of joy, and instead it looks like war? Exclusion, health issues, gender issues, corruption, sexual abuse and harassment. Not to speak of doping, match fixing, etc., etc. These challenges are real. Sport is a mirror of society. But I think that in order to combat them, here we have to send to society a clear, a strong message, which is to embody values in sport and in life. Live like you play, which is the distillation of Pope Francis's quote, challenge yourselves in the game of life as you challenge yourselves in the game of sports. Live like you play. Sport is a training ground for developing both body and soul. One of the very first Christian writers, Saint Irenaeus, used to say that the glory of God is the living person. When the person flourishes in all its dimensions, spiritual and bodily. I like to quote one of the characters of the film The Chariots of Fire. He says, when I run, I feel that God smiles. That's the same thought Saint Irenaeus put in theological language. Sport is not only about winning competitions, and Pope Francis in his letter to us said, I quote again, sport is not only about winning competition and competitions and striving for medals, about earning fame or money, but about achieving our best and in so doing becoming better persons. This means putting the human person in all its dignity and without distinction of race, sex, religion, or nationality at the center of sport. That's why we choose this. Sport at the service of humanity. It is the sport that has to be at the service of the human person, and not the human person at the service of sport, at the sport industry and the sport business. It also means putting the sport at the service of humanity rather than making human beings into objects to be used or, worse, abused. Here we are leaders of faith communities, sport organizations, academia, non-profit. We must think creatively in order to bridge divides through sport, and we've done this in this 1.5 days. Pope Francis said, in a society torn apart by so many divisions, sport is still one of the areas where people can ideally meet without discrimination. It was nice to listen to Cardinal Lacroix speaking of his experience as a French-speaking boy in New England, not able to speak English, but able to play. You give to a bunch of kids a ball and they begin to play, even if they cannot speak the same language. That's the power of sport. Well, and let me finish with a story which I caught in the media after the rugby championship in Yokohama in Japan. Siya Kolisi is the captain of the South African Springboks. And he is the first black captain of the Springboks. Rugby used to be the Afrikaner, all-white, elite sport. While Siya Kolisi, led the South African team to victory in final against England. It was last Sunday, and he said in declarations right after the match, we, the South African team, come from different backgrounds, different races, and we came together with one goal, and we really wanted to achieve it, which was to win, obviously. I really hope, he says, that we've done it for South Africa to show that we can pull together if we want to achieve something. And again, he says, I've never seen, since I've been alive, a South Africa like this. All the country was coalesced to support the South African Springboks. With all the challenges we have, and they have some, the coach said to us, we are not playing for ourselves, we are playing for all back home. We can achieve all we want if we work together as one. End of quote. And I say, doesn't it apply to us all here? If we play together, we can achieve the social change we look for. Finally, let me thank once again all organizers, partners, and participants, you, particularly President De Joya and his wonderful staff that have made possible this incredible and this magnificent gathering possible. Thank you all. Thank you for help us to go on and to push forward this message.
Melchior, thank you very much indeed for those closing remarks. I'd just like to actually pick up on what Melchior said, talking about epics. President De Joya, epic conference. Thank you so much, really. And for my team, Sport for Humanity, it means a huge amount, and we are very grateful indeed, as we are to all of you. You know that feeling you get at the end of a great match? You sometimes want to linger in the stadium a little bit. Well, you can. You can stay here as long as you like. You're very welcome to take in as much of the museum as you've got time for. Cardinal, 5.5 hours if you've got it. You're very welcome to stay. I'm just looking at my watch and aware of actually one quote in the gallery was Max Baer, who said, I define fear as standing across the ring from Joe Louis knowing he wants to go home early. So we're bang on time, so don't hold that against me. Thank you all very much indeed. It's been great being with you, and good travels. Take care.